The desert had its own way of breathing at night. Its silence wasn't truly silent, and its emptiness wasn't truly empty. Beneath a sky full of pale, distant stars, the dunes looked like frozen waves, quiet, unmoving, waiting. The moon hung low that night, resting lightly on the horizon like a tired traveler. Salem sat on a cracked wooden stool outside his old mud brick house, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. The night breeze brushed against his face, carrying grains of sand that tapped softly against the walls. It was the kind of wind that felt like a whisper, never loud, never harsh, but constantly reminding him that he was alone. His house was old, older than he cared to admit, and time had not been kind to it. The roof dipped in the middle like a weary back, and the door's hinges creaked every time the wind pressed against it. Many nights, Salem wondered how long it would take before the whole place simply collapsed on its own. But he had no money to fix it, and no one insisted he do so. His life had become quiet enough that even his house didn't seem to bother standing properly anymore. The faint glow of his small lantern flickered beside him, casting long shadows across the empty yard. The desert beyond lay open and unclaimed, stretching across the horizon like an ocean of dust. His thoughts, however, were not as still as the night. Layla. Her name alone made his heart sink, as if someone had placed a stone on his chest. She had left weeks ago, but her words stayed behind, echoing sharper and louder than the sound of any storm. "I'm done living like this, Salem. I'm tired. I need more than sand and disappointment." He could still see her face when she said it, calm, confident, almost relieved. She hadn't even cried. The only tears that night had been his. "You don't have any plans," she added harshly. "You dream, Salem. You dream too much and do too little." Her suitcase had been packed long before she spoke. He had realized then that her decision hadn't been impulsive. She had been preparing to leave for a long time. Maybe she had been gone in her heart months before she physically walked out. Salem rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers, trying to ease the pressure building behind his eyes. He wasn't angry at her, not anymore. Anger required strength, and strength wasn't something he had much of these days. What he felt was something much heavier. Emptiness. Not the emptiness of a quiet house or a lonely desert, but a deeper kind, the kind that settles into a person's bones and refuses to leave. He had been alone before Layla, and he thought he understood loneliness back then, but now he knew better. Loneliness after love was different. It wasn't simple. It wasn't peaceful. It was a reminder of what once was and what could have been and what had slipped so easily out of his hands. He exhaled slowly, letting the cold air fill his lungs. The desert at night could comfort some men, not him. A small, tired sigh escaped his mouth. "It's quiet tonight," he murmured to no one. His voice sounded rough, as if it too was growing old and worn. A moment later, a faint sound reached his ears. It was distant at first, then grew clearer. A soft meow, weak, thin, almost broken. Salem straightened slightly, turning his head toward the sound. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the groan of the cracked wooden fence. He heard it again. A trembling, helpless cry. He stood up slowly, lantern in hand, and stepped toward the noise. His sandals dragged lightly against the sand as he followed the faint meowing. Near the side of the house, a small shape curled against the wall. A tiny cat, frail and trembling. Its fur was dirty and matted, strands sticking out in different directions. It was ribs thin, barely more than skin and bones. The cat opened its eyes and looked up at him. Those eyes, large, glossy, and full of something that looked painfully familiar, held his gaze without fear. For a moment, Salem simply stared back. It was unusual for stray cats to roam near the desert villages, but this one looked different. It wasn't cautious. It wasn't ready to run. It was desperate. He knelt beside it. The lantern's light revealed just how neglected the small creature was. One of its ears had a small cut, and its paws were covered in dust. The cat's breath came out uneven, a tiny shiver passing through its body. "You poor thing," he whispered, reaching out slowly. The cat didn't flinch. He placed his hand on the ground, palm up. The cat hesitated for a second, then nudged its head against his fingers, seeking warmth. Salem felt something tighten in his throat. He knew hunger. He had lived with it more nights than he cared to remember. He knew the way that it weakened the body and clouded the mind. He knew the way that it made a person, or an animal, feel small and forgotten. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a dry piece of bread, the only food he had saved for dinner. It wasn't much. In fact, it wasn't even enough for him. But the cat's trembling made his chest ache. He stared at the bread, then at the cat. "What harm is it if I go hungry tonight, huh?" he said softly. "Hunger and we've known each other for years." He placed the bread gently in front of it. The cat sniffed it, paused, and then began eating with desperate eagerness. Each bite sounded like hope being swallowed, fast, shaky, uncertain. Salem sat down beside her, resting his back against the wall. He watched her eat, feeling something strange and warm spread through him. Not joy, exactly, but not sadness either. Perhaps something closer to relief. Relief that he could help something, even when he couldn't help himself. "Eat, little one," he murmured. "Tonight, the bread is yours." When the cat finished, she walked weakly to his side and curled up near his foot. Then, slowly, she crawled onto his lap and settled there, her tiny body rising and falling with each shaky breath. Salem froze. It had been a long time since anything, or anyone, had leaned on him. He wasn't used to warmth anymore. The cat pressed her head against his chest, a soft purr humming deep in her throat. Salem lowered his hand and stroked her gently. He felt the roughness of her fur, the thingness of her frame. She was fragile in the same way he felt inside. A small laugh escaped him, quiet and uncertain. "Look at us, two broken souls on a broken night." The breeze softened, brushing gently against them. The desert suddenly felt less vast, less empty. The world felt a little smaller, a little kinder. For the first time in weeks, Salem didn't feel the weight of silence pressing down on him. Instead, he felt something warm and soft resting against his arm. He blinked in the dim light. The little cat was curled up beside him on his thin mattress, her tiny body sinking into the old blanket. Her breathing was calm now, steady, no longer anxious or trembling. Her head rested on the crook of his elbow, as if she had slept in that exact spot 1,000 times. Salem stared at her for a long moment. He couldn't remember the last time he had shared his bed with another living creature. He certainly hadn't expected that the first one would be a stray cat from the desert. Slowly, he sat up, careful not to disturb her. But as soon as he moved, her ears twitched, and she lifted her head, blinking sleepily. When she saw him, she let out a small, soft meow, the kind that almost sounded like she was greeting him. He felt his lips pull into a faint smile. "Good morning," he whispered. "You slept well? Better than I did, that's for sure." The cat stretched, arching her back before stepping across the mattress toward him. She nudged her head against his arm, then his cheek, purring lightly. Salem chuckled under his breath. "You're friendly, aren't you? Most strays run like the wind." He reached out and stroked her head, Her fur was still rough and dusty, but her eyes, now that she wasn't curled in fear, looked brighter, more alive, like the eyes of an animal that finally believed she was safe. A strange thought crossed his mind. Maybe she doesn't have anyone, just like me. The idea hit harder than he expected. He felt it settling in his chest, heavy, but warm. He stood slowly, and the cat followed, weaving between his ankles with surprising confidence. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, the early morning blue creeping across the horizon. Salem stepped outside, the cool desert air touching his face. For once, instead of the emptiness of dawn filling him with dread, he felt accompanied. The cat trotted ahead, then stopped and looked back, as if urging him to follow. "Where are you going?" Salem asked, amused. "You live here now?" Her tail flicked, and she meowed again, louder this time, almost demanding. He laughed softly. "All right, I'm coming." She led him only a few steps outside the door before she sat down, lifting her head to him expectantly. Salem sighed. Food. She was hungry. He had nothing left from last night. The dry bread he had shared with her had been his only meal. His stomach rumbled quietly, reminding him that he hadn't eaten either. He crouched beside her. "Listen," he said gently, "I'd give you anything I have, but I don't have anything right now." The cat's ears flattened a little, and Salem felt something inside him twist. I'll find something," he added. "Just wait here." He didn't know why he said it. He had never spoken to an animal like this, but the cat tilted her head, as if she understood. Salem walked toward the old storage box near the edge of his yard. It was meant to hold supplies, but it had been nearly empty for months. He lifted the lid and rummaged through it, only to find a few dried beans, an old pot, and a cracked bowl. No bread, no rice, nothing for him, let alone for her. He sighed deeply. It wasn't the first time his cupboards were empty, but somehow it felt worse now, because the little creature waiting by his door was counting on him. He closed the box and stood there for a moment, staring toward the small village market in the distance. He had been avoiding going there. The shopkeepers knew his situation. Some looked at him with pity, others with judgment. Salem hated both. But this morning felt different. This morning, he had a reason to go. He turned back toward the house. "Come on," he said quietly. The cat responded immediately, trotting to his feet as if she had always belonged there. The village was small, barely more than a collection of modest homes, a few shops, and a single dusty road cutting through the middle. People were already beginning to stir. Smoke rose from chimneys, and faint voices echoed in the distance. As Salem walked, the cat stayed at his heel, occasionally rushing ahead to sniff something before returning to his side. A few villagers paused to stare. "Is that a cat following you, Salem?" a woman asked with a half-smile. He glanced at her. "Yes, she found me last night." The woman chuckled softly. "Animals choose their people, you know. Maybe she chose you." Salem didn't know what to say. He simply nodded and kept walking. Another man, older and more serious, stepped out of a shop and scrutinized him. Salem stiffened. His eyes dropped to the cat, then back to Salem. "Stray cats bring fleas and trouble," he muttered. Salem clenched his jaw but said nothing. The cat, sensing his tension, pressed herself against his leg protectively. Salem reached down and stroked her head gently before moving on. It struck him then how quickly he had become attached to her presence. The bakery. The small bakery at the center of the village was the busiest place this early in the morning. The smell of fresh bread drifted through the air, making Salem's stomach twist painfully with hunger. He approached cautiously. The baker, Hassan, was a round man with a beard dusted in flour. He was known for having a good heart, but a short temper. Hassan spotted him and raised an eyebrow. "You're up early."
"So are you," Salem replied quietly. The baker chuckled. "Bread doesn't bake itself." Salem hesitated for a long moment before speaking. "Hassan, the baker sighed before Salem even finished the sentence. "You want bread." Salem looked down at the cat beside him, who gazed up at Hassan with those large, pleading eyes. Hassan followed the cat's stare and softened slightly. "Ah, so that's your companion now," Salem said quietly. "She was starving. I gave her what I had last night." Hassan looked at Salem, then at the empty street behind him, then at the cat. "Wait a second. Here," he said finally. He disappeared into the bakery. Salem held his breath. He hated asking for help. He hated how small it made him feel. But he couldn't walk away. Not when the little creature next to him was hungry. A moment later, Hassan returned with 2 small loaves of bread, still warm. One for Salem, one for the cat. "This is all I can spare today." Salem swallowed hard. "Thank you, Hassan. Truly." "Don't thank me," the baker replied gruffly. "Just, take care of yourself. And her." Salem nodded. Hassan turned and went back inside, pretending he wasn't being generous, though everyone knew he was. Salem crouched down and placed 1 loaf in front of the cat. She sniffed it eagerly before tearing into it with tiny, hurried bites. As she ate, Salem stood there quietly chewing his own bread, savoring the warmth and softness. It had been too long since he had tasted something fresh. A strange feeling crept into him, half joy, half ache. He wasn't eating alone today. On the walk back, Salem felt lighter. The sun had begun to rise, coloring the sky shades of orange and gold. The cat, full and content, walked with more energy now, occasionally bounding ahead before circling around him.
When they reached his house, Salem placed the leftover bread inside, then sat outside on the same stool from the night before. The cat hopped into his lap again, curling up comfortably. He stroked her back slowly. "What am I supposed to call you?" he murmured. She looked up at him and blinked. "How about Nora?" He wasn't sure where the name came from, but as soon as he said it, the cat meowed, the sound soft and approving. "Nora it is," Salem said with a small smile. He rested his hand on her side and felt her breathing, steady and warm. For the first time in many months, Salem felt something he had forgotten the shape of: hope. Not the wild, unrealistic kind he once had, the kind Layla mocked him for. This was quieter, smaller, but real. Sometimes hope didn't shout. Sometimes it arrived quietly, on soft paws. The days that followed were not extraordinary by any usual measure, but to Salem, they felt like gentle shifts, subtle, almost invisible changes that slowly rearranged the heaviness inside him. Nora settled into his life as though she had always belonged there. She followed him everywhere, to the water well, to the old storage shed, even to the small patch of shade where he sometimes sat during the hottest hours of the afternoon. Her presence was a quiet reminder that he wasn't alone anymore. And when the nights came, she curled up beside his pillow, purring so softly that Salem sometimes mistook the sound for his own heartbeat. Every morning, Nora woke him before sunrise, gently pawing at his arm or brushing her tail across his face until he groaned awake. All right," he mumbled one morning, shielding his face from her persistent nudging. "You're worse than an alarm clock." Nora meowed loudly in response, causing Salem to laugh. He hadn't laughed like that, honestly laughed, in months. After waking him, she always trotted toward the door, glancing back every few seconds to ensure he was following. She had learned that the morning walk often led to a small breakfast, even if Salem struggled not to feel guilty each time he needed to ask the baker or another villager for leftover scraps. But somehow, Feeding Nora felt less like a burden and more like a purpose. She gave him a reason to get up, a reason to step out into the world, a reason to breathe a little deeper. And that mattered. People in the village began to notice the change in him. The man who once walked with his shoulders slumped and his eyes downcast now lifted his head occasionally. He greeted people, not with full smiles yet, but with nods, with acknowledgement. One afternoon, as he waited near the bakery's back door for Hassan to finish kneading the dough, a woman named Farida approached him. She was older, kind-eyed, and known for feeding the birds near her home. "That cat is never far from you," she said warmly. Salem looked down at Nora, who was rubbing her head against his ankle. "She follows me everywhere." Farida gave him a wise smile. "Animals choose us when we need them, even when we don't see it." Salem hesitated. I didn't think I needed anyone," she said gently, "and yet, here you are, carrying a small heart beside your own." Her words lingered long after she left. Salem stared at Nora, who stared back with slow blinks, her silent way of telling him she trusted him completely. And somehow, that trust felt heavier and more comforting than any words Layla ever spoke. Salem's financial situation was a storm he couldn't ignore. His savings were gone, and Layla hadn't left him with anything except debts he could barely keep track of. But one morning, as he walked past the carpenter's workshop, the owner called out to him. "Salem!" He stopped, surprised. "Yes?" The carpenter, a tall man with rough hands and a tired face, gestured him closer. "I've lost one of my helpers. He left for the city last week. I could use an extra pair of hands, just simple tasks, carrying wood, sanding planks, cleaning tools." Salem's heart thudded. I don't know anything about carpentry." "You don't have to," the man shrugged. "You know how to work, don't you?" Salem nodded slowly. "Then come tomorrow. It won't pay much, but it's something." Something. That word alone felt like a spark inside him. "Thank you," Salem said quietly. "I'll be here." Nora, who had been sitting at his feet, lifted her head and let out a proud meow, as if she understood exactly how important this moment was. Salem arrived early the next day, Nora trotting behind him with her tail high like a tiny desert queen. "You can't bring that cat in here," the carpenter said, pointing at her with a stern expression. Salem opened his mouth to argue, but the man chuckled. "I'm joking, mostly. She can stay outside the workshop, as long as she doesn't sleep on the wood." Nora tilted her head and meowed indignantly. Salem bent down and whispered, "Just wait outside, I won't be long." But she refused to leave. She sat by the doorway, watching him work, her eyes following every move he made. Whenever he lifted something heavy, she rose on her paws, alert, as if ready to help. Whenever he paused to catch his breath, she curled near the door again, content simply to be close. Salem's tasks were simple at first: sweeping sawdust, organizing tools, and carrying planks. His arms ached and his back complained, but he pushed through. At midday, as he finally stepped outside for rest, Nora leapt into his lap as though she had been waiting hours for that exact moment. "You really are loyal," he murmured, stroking her head. For a brief moment, he wondered if Layla had ever looked at him with this kind of trust. The answer arrived quickly. No. At the end of the day, the carpenter handed him a small envelope with a few bills inside. "It's not much, but I pay every day. Come back tomorrow." Salem held the envelope carefully, almost reverently. It wasn't a fortune, not even close, but it was the first money he had earned since Layla left, the first money he had earned with his own hands in what felt like forever. As he walked back home, Nora running ahead and then circling around him, a strange feeling swelled in his chest. Pride. Not the loud kind, not the kind that boasted or bragged, but the quiet kind, the kind that whispered, "You're trying. You haven't given up." When they reached home, Salem placed the envelope on the table.
and knelt beside Nora, who was already staring at him with expectant eyes. "You know," he said softly, "things were different before you came." Nora tilted her head. "I used to wake up and feel nothing. I used to go through days that felt like they were made of sand." He paused. "But now, I feel something again. Something small but real." Nora purred and pressed her forehead against him. Salem closed his eyes. He hadn't realized how much he needed that simple connection, how much he needed something to care for, something that depended on him, something that stayed. For the first time in months, Salem cooked himself a real dinner, lentils and rice, and shared a little of it with Nora. Then he sat outside on his old stool, watching the desert fade into twilight. But the night didn't feel empty anymore. Nora curled in his lap, her tiny body warm, steady, alive. And Salem, leaning back against the wall, staring at the stars, felt something he had believed he would never feel again. Not joy, not peace, but the beginning of both. 5 days into his new routine, working at the carpenter's shop during the day, sharing meals with Nora and sleeping with her curled beside him, Salem returned home to find an envelope slipped under his door. His heart tightened. Letters rarely came to him. When they did, they were usually bills or reminders of debts. He picked it up slowly, almost afraid to open it. Nora climbed onto his lap as he sat down, her eyes curious. Salem unfolded the letter. As he read the first line, his breath caught. It was from Layla. His hands trembled slightly, the paper rustling between his fingers. Nora meowed softly, sensing the shift in his heartbeat. Salem swallowed hard, lowered the letter to his lap, and stared at the desert in front of him. After a long moment, he whispered to Nora, "It seems the past isn't done with us yet." The night deepened around Salem's small home like a thick, velvety canvas. The desert, usually restless with shifting winds and wandering creatures, seemed to pause, as if it too was watching him. The dying fire beside him crackled softly, sending up sparks that vanished into the star-spotted sky, but Salem's mind was far from quiet. He kept glancing at the small envelope he had found under his door earlier that day. Letters rarely came to him, and when they did, they were usually bills or reminders of debts. This envelope was different, heavier, urgent. Every time he looked at it, he felt a strange tightening in his chest. A sudden knock at the door startled him, one sharp knock, then another.